Hello everyone, welcome to another artwork analysis. Now, this episode is going to be a little bit different. Usually I analyze one piece from a particular artist or something, but I wanted to maybe change it up a little bit. Because it would limit me too much from talking about certain concepts. Now, I want to talk about mainly the idea of reality spectrum this time around. Now, reality spectrum is a concept that first introduced to me by Bobby Chu, the artist from Imaginum Studios, but other artists have also talked about it. It's the idea that every design that you ever do must fall between these two gaps. So real to stylized. So I feel every artist has their preference of where they are situating their style at. So for instance, if you're looking at maybe a really realistic painter, they would probably be very close to the real criteria. Now, but if you're trying to do some crazy cartoon or something, then you're probably going to be leaning here. But that's the extremes. Mostly you're going to be somewhere in the middle. Maybe something more realistic here, or let's use a different color here. So if you're doing something realistic but a little bit more stylization, mostly you might see it with realistic anime, then that will be where you would be situated here. Or if you are maybe somebody who still uses realistic lighting but proportions and such are more stylized, might be something like here. But it's very arbitrary. That's really my point here. Now, why is this an important concept? When you are designing anything, environments, characters, etc., for entertainment media or otherwise, you're going to have to think about consistently being on this spectrum. If you are not consistent with a design, you end up risking making a design that is a little bit off-putting. So I'm going to be using Overlord, the anime, as an example. Now, why is this a different episode? It's because not only am I going to be analyzing several characters, I'm going to be showing some where I feel wasn't hitting the mark, and there's a common mistake, if you could call it that, for a lot of anime styles. So let's really get started. I'm going to start with the main character. Now, this is basically the Overlord, what the anime is based off of. His name is Ainz, but that's really not a big deal here. Hopefully, just as a precaution, I won't be spoiling anything, so anyways, I'm going to be talking about the design. You notice that this design, I feel, is very strong, and the reason why is from a reality spectrum basis, everything is consistent. So in his case, his design is more obviously towards the real look, based off of having a skull and bones and otherwise, but there is stylization in there. So when it comes down to it, we're probably going to be putting it somewhere here. Of course, everyone will have different ideas of where it might be, but you get the idea. The whole design is consistently around this mark, and that's why it works. And on top of that, I'm going to be sort of delving into silhouette a little bit. Very strong silhouette. You feel the strength when you look at this character. Almost like a square and broad shoulders to show dominance, and there's no neck, which means that you feel like if you wouldn't know otherwise, it could be a very muscular skeleton, if that makes sense. Something that you know this being is very strong and solid, and literally a square. So, anyways, from a consistency standpoint, it's pretty strong, and it really gets the personality and the story elements down for this character. Let's move on. So, we can't talk about anime without talking about petite girls at times, right? So why does this character work? Mainly, we have to think about it this way. Again, from a reality spectrum, this is probably going to be leaning more towards stylized. But it's consistently stylized throughout. So her head, and compared to the rest of her body, is stylized to the point where you can believe that all parts could exist on this character, especially when you consider the silhouette. The silhouette is sort of like a reverse wine glass, I noticed. Still very strong, but it has a really weird appeal to it, and I'm sure if you watch enough anime, you'll see a lot of characters who look like this. So these proportions tend to work because, again, consistency, right? We're looking at the head, which is, of course, very stylized, with the rest of the body being more stylized proportions. They're definitely not the ideal Andrew Loomis type of proportions, as we could assume. So we can believe that, hey, perhaps this design is consistent. Might not be the pinnacle of, like, the Citizen Kane of character design, but it's believable, given the circumstances and given the medium. So here, we can start talking about things that might not be working. So, the lizard people, the men on the back, are pretty solid. The reason why is, despite the fact that they have sort of realistic muscles, this angle might not be the best, but I couldn't find a better screenshot. The muscles are very, in a way, realistic, very defined, right? But their proportions and their posing, the fact that they're leaning in, makes them less than human. So they're probably leaning towards realism, but at the same time, they have a bit of style to it, and it's consistent. The fact that they balance the human elements with a lot of things that humans probably wouldn't have means that we end up with a design that could work, especially given that they define the scales as well. So it kind of works. So where it doesn't work is, you can probably assume, I feel like the female here might be a bit awkward. Slightly. Not the most criminal. If you keep watching, you'll know what I mean by criminal. It's not a great design, in my opinion. It's kind of hitting territory where it's starting to have disjointed problems, where the eye is very stylized, but the proportions of this lizard is pretty... it's a little bit too realistic, despite the fact that, yes, it's probably overgrown proportionally. You know what I mean. It's kind of a little bit awkward over here, but I'm going to move on. So, here's another pair where it could work. Not the most criminal, but we're starting to hit problems in the reality spectrum. So, this is where we have to analyze why it's happening. Notice that their heads are, of course, of the stylized girl that I was showing before, the vampire. But if we were to look downwards to how they look from the body and down, we're starting to hit into consistency problems. We look at this body and we feel like we could see a realistic head attached to these proportions. And it's not a very good thing. It's something that a lot of anime tends to do, where you have a very stylized anime head, and then you have a very realistic body when it comes to proportions. Had it been silhouetted a bit more stylized, like this girl, we might be able to believe it, right? But the fact that their clothing defines their body and their silhouette means that we're gonna start seeing it. We're just gonna compare the head to the rest of the body, and that's when we start hitting really weird areas when it comes to design. Of course, I'm not saying these are good designs. I'm saying these are probably below average, and we would have to assume that not every design in a huge cast of anime characters would have great design. This is, again, a major problem. Let's just say, had they maybe changed the proportions so that the silhouette becomes a bit more exaggerated, perhaps the head would be more justified. And if anybody is wondering, I do think the left character is a bit less criminal than the right one. The right one is definitely you're cutting out a realistic head off of a character and then putting it on this body. It's just, so let's try to avoid this type of exaggeration. So we want to perhaps just force it a little bit more, like just have a little bit more to it. Even if it's off character or anything, I do think there has to be something that can cover this sort of defined human shape up, this realistic human shape. So let's start hitting the really bad cases, and you'll start seeing there is a big problem when it comes to females. This design, when I was watching this anime, I was a little bit distracted. If we were to go by the reality spectrum, you could probably imagine there is a big problem with this head with the rest of the body. So the body is, if we go back to the reality spectrum, I'll put it here, we're probably going to be looking at a body that is very close to realistic proportions. Of course, we can take into account rendering such, but I'm being a bit hyperbolic here. But her head is all the way over here. And this is when we start hitting really big problems when it comes to design. We can't believe this type of character, given that we hit a point where her proportions are just too real for anything below her neck. And then once we hit her neck, we get this super anime, very cartoony face. Now the rendering is making it less criminal, but imagine if we were to render this with very realistic painting styles. This is gonna look really weird, and this is one of those designs, barring the clothing. The clothing could be pretty cool. I'm not going to complain about that. But the whole body is just, the base of it is just not there. It's definitely a little bit weird to me. And I don't know if it's just me or other people who were watching it. She starts off wearing a cloak, and that was fine. If you... I'm not sure if everyone's gonna watch it, but when you have a cloak, you're kind of hiding the proportions of the human body. So it wasn't too bad in that case. But once she took off her cloak, that's when this was a bit, again, just a little bit too weird to me. So how would we really fix it? Well, we could stylize the body as we would imagine. I probably wouldn't be able to do anything here, but just imagine if she had more perhaps petite proportions, or maybe something that is a little bit more exaggerated, curves are a bit more exaggerated, that sort of thing. Or again, having a cloak, something to hide her silhouette, her very human and very real silhouette. The other way is, of course, if we were to make the proportions a bit more real, if we were to just make the eyes a bit smaller, that type of thing. But of course, probably wouldn't be part of her character if we were to do that, but just something to think about. This is one of those design problems where, again, many anime do this. They kind of have very realistic bodies and then just put a very anime girl face on it. And it tends to happen more to the female side of designs when it comes to anime. I would try to avoid designs like these for sure. Again, I'm not saying this anime is the pinnacle of like high budget, multi-million dollar type of design. But we have to be careful when we are doing our own characters. When we just attach, we're Frankensteining an anime head on top of a very realistic body. I guess I wouldn't say realistic. There are things that are exaggerated, such as the hips here, right here. But it is still possible in reality, and there are definitely women in real life that would have this type of silhouette, and it's just not going to work with the head she's given. Now, let's look at something that is in the middle ground then. I don't want to talk negatively about this anime fully, but let's talk about ways you could sort of die down the issue of the reality spectrum. So, with this character, as you can see, her head is of course still anime, and we're gonna look at her body, and we're gonna be like, well, doesn't really fit the body, right? Doesn't really, the body again could be very reasonably put into a realistic head, because her body can be can exist in reality. Now, the main issue, again, is the reality spectrum. And what I want to talk about to finish it off is, again, how you would use silhouette to kind of hide the issue. So notice that her hair and her wings are different ways to change the silhouette so we're not too distracted by the fact that her body is very real, very realistic. So now that you add the elements of stylization, so of course we don't have dark angel wings and really, and most people probably wouldn't have hair like this. Or horns, I guess you could just put the horns in there too. But the fact that we don't have those features in reality will make it less criminal, because now we associate the fact that, hey, these supernatural elements are part of her body, meaning that it will start fitting in with her stylized head. So in this case, the silhouette and the design will kind of die down the gap in the reality spectrum, where again the head is too stylized and the body is too real. Now imagine all those features kind of dragging the body, the reality spectrum point to somewhere around here. That's when it starts being, okay, it's pretty acceptable. It's not, again, the pinnacle of design, but it's something that could possibly work. So, what is really my point here? Design is always about consistency. It's not just about the reality spectrum. Even though, yeah, I could have analyzed Pixar or something, they have a very good sense of what very consistent basis for design could be. You have to really look into why you are giving certain proportions and why you are giving certain design elements to a character. You have to ask yourself constantly whether something is looking right with every other parts of the body. And of course, if you go to my other videos, you kind of realize I always talk about the big picture. Never try to isolate parts and design parts instead of designing the whole with the sum of those parts, if that makes sense. Anyways, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. Definitely check out the anime. I really like it. I usually don't like a lot of these types of anime, but definitely look into this one. It's pretty funny. Anyways, thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.